Donc, ça nous permet d'enchaîner sur le deuxième panel de ce matin avec le keynote de Maria Economou qui nous vient de l'Université de Glasgow. Maria, c'est à toi.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci beaucoup à Géraldine et son équipe pour l'excellent programme qu'ils ont préparé pour nous, et à Rebecca et Fotini pour l'invitation d'être ici. Comme Rebecca a dit, I'll continue in English to avoid the stupidities. I think this will be the theme of the day, and I hope the translation, which is automatic, kind of does justice to what I want to say. So I first wanted to acknowledge my co-authors, because this is a truly collaborative project across different countries. So Rojin from Iraq, Mohammed Ahmed and her team in Kurdistan were working with me on this. And there's also Viveka Tifori from the Athena Research Center in Athens, and I'm based in Glasgow, so a truly international team. And I'm going to talk about a VR project, an experience called Nobody's Listening. That's why the title at the end, chiming with the invisibles of this festival. This is a VR experience that took place that is about the Yézidi genocide in Iraq from 2014, trying to raise awareness, encourage action, and bring reparative justice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this was organized, but mainly how it was evaluated and the lessons we learned from this. So although ISIS the genocide started more than 10 years ago, UNESCO recognizes as genocide. The perpetrators remain unpunished, and it's really only known in very few cycles, only on the ones like are closely related to this, despite the fact that, as you can see the numbers, which are quite scary, there were more than 3,000 Yazidis killed, and almost 7,000, mainly women and children, displaced, still living in camps with their homeland destroyed. So we already started hearing, you'll hear more about the power of VR to close the distance and to encourage emotional engagement, which is usually a prerequisite for people to take action and in terms of justice and try to do something actively to change that situation. So VR was offering a real power here, but at the same time, for all of you, from artists, NGOs, human rights organizations working in this area, you know about this power, but it also raises the questions I put on the right-hand side. They're really important questions. Can it really foster emotional, does it really work, basically? Can it foster emotional engagement with difficult heritage? Does it raise human awareness? Under which conditions does it really work? And how will we know that it actually worked? So this was a mobile VR exhibition that ran through Iraq and also in some places the rest of the world. And you can see some of the technicalities here, but it was basically art, technology, and advocacy designed with Yazidi survivors by NGO organizations. I was not involved in the design, I was involved in the evaluation. So I'm going to talk to you today as a practitioner. I work both at the university as a professor, researching things, but also at the museum of the university as a cultural heritage practitioner. And in both of these things, I'm going to talk more about the research and the methodology. Although I'm going to talk about a specific case study, I want to go beyond that, about a methodology that we can test to see how we can evaluate working in difficult heritage with a tool like this. And I'm not claiming that VR is the only way. It's actually sometimes a little bit maybe too powerful. There are a lot of other digital tools, and some of the previous speakers talk about a lot of other ones. But if we are going to use this, some of the work we did is trying to test systematically and thoroughly what the impact is. So with this one, there was no graphic content, and the user had to select, could choose between the three character perspectives, a Yazidi woman, a Yazidi man, and an ISIS fighter. So we're going to talk a lot about the trauma-informed design, which I think is really important, so we don't re-traumatize users when they go through the experience. But it was also, the experience finishes with a call to justice. It asks you to act. But it's a big question that I want to put to all of you. To what extent, after these powerful emotions and impact that a lot of these experiences have, do people actually follow afterwards? I think Valérie talked about empowerment in her talk, and it was something similar I wanted to raise and discuss afterwards. It was only 12 minutes, and it ran in different Oculus Guest headsets. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the findings, which were really powerful. 85% of the participants, and sorry, I think I skipped one of the most important things, the methodology, because very few people, as far as I know, actually have this kind of sample when they're evaluating VR experiences. This is one of the first non-Western, not in a lab context evaluation study. So we did it across 5 cities in Iraq. You can see there Kirkuk, Duhok, Suleimani, Baghdad, Erbil. And you can see the profile. This was a lot of Kurdish, not Yazidi participants of the VR experience. And one of the interesting findings is how they connected their own histories of personal and cultural trauma with that of the Yazidis. You can see there were 45% women, roughly 54% men. They came from different ethnic groups. They were mainly in their 20s and 30s. 67% 7 Kurdish, 22 Arab, most of them higher education degree holders. And we adapted the Horizon 2020, another project I worked on before, the emotive framework that was testing emotional engagement in museums. That was about ancient heritage. We were, in my case, in Glasgow, we were looking at the Romans in Scotland, the Antonine Wall, and we tested how people were engaging and responding to digital storytelling. So it was really interesting for us to test the framework with a very different and quite hard and difficult topic. The results were really powerful because, as you can see, 85% said it increased their awareness of the genocide. They also learned a lot of new things about the Yazidi culture, 71%. 57% said that they felt historical empathy that came through their interviews. They felt they were connecting, putting themselves in the shoes of others, like the Yezidis in this case. And more than 80% stated strong emotional reactions, grief, sadness, empathy. 87% said they were moved, and more than 4.5 said they would recommend this to their family or friends. But what moved us most was this 92% that believed justice had not been served. This was after 12 minutes wearing the headset and doing the experience. 75 said they intended to learn more and to support advocacy, and this is the question I said before. That was their stated intent. They also said in the kind of long box there some very specific things that really demonstrate strong civic engagement. They wanted prosecution of the perpetrators, financial and psychological compensation, reconstruction of Sinjar, which was destroyed, international genocide recognition. But 70% more said they will continue thinking about this. What we did not do, and it's something I want to discuss maybe later, is the long-term impact of these things. That's a stated intent to take action. Do they actually do this? But in any case, these results are really important and quite striking. And now this is what we think is the main theoretical contribution of our paper and of this research. For those of you working with VR, you know that the 3 things in the kind of brown beige area that I put there, presence, the feeling of being there, emotions, being moved by what you see in the VR experience, and empathy, are the main aspects that we talk about impact. We want to suggest a 4th layer, an additional one, not of course replacing this quite well-researched one, historical empathy. And we think that this took place through something that we call analogical recognition. The Kurdish participants in the VR experience, they were able to connect what they were seeing and being immersed in the environment from the Yazidis with their own histories of personal and cultural trauma. So this is the framework based on all of this, on 3 design principles, and the 4th one on evaluation, which I think is really important. You need to co-create with consent with your communities. You need to have a trauma-informed design, and I mentioned some ways we did that. This storytelling needs to be situated, and I talked quite a lot about the action pathways. The fourth one, which I think is really important, and it was like my call to action to all of you, is the rigorous and community-situated evaluation. So just summarizing here, the justice-led immersion reframed XR from sensation to advocacy, and I think this is really important for anybody working in this area. Human rights, cultural heritage institutions, archive, memory organizations. So historical empathy as this fourth layer, I think, is really worth thinking more about, and the design and evaluation framework. So finally, we're trying all this out. We have a free online workshop in June that I wanted to invite. It's not just for researchers, it's also a lot for cultural heritage professionals, artists, NGOs, human rights educators, where we want to test in different contexts. We tested this extensively in a very specific one to see if it holds in very different situations. On the right-hand side, and the QR is the full paper, it's open access on the Heritage Journal, and just today, fresh out in the press, there is a 3-minute video abstract. So there's all like different ways you can try this out. Thank you so much.
Je suis heureuse d'accueillir à présent la deuxième intervenante, donc Fonténie Vénéri, qui nous vient de Grèce, qui est cofondatrice de Hétérotopia, mais qui travaille également avec 3 universités. Elle va vous expliquer également le travail qu'elle mène autour de cette thématique. Bienvenue.
Merci Géraldine pour cette invitation. Aussi, je veux parler anglais. Thank you very much, Maria, for this very interesting presentation, for this very interesting project, for adding some very important layers of critical approaches to these immersive experiences. I would like now to build on that a bit further and actually focus on the tensions that are mapped in this environment, in this digital immersive environment. I will speak about dissonant archives, and I will explain later, and their digital mediation. So archives are not neutral. They are not simply collections of material, especially the obviously difficult ones. They are shaped by trauma, by asymmetries of power, and by processes of exclusion. They carry absences as much as they carry content. This means that engaging with them always involves a form of positioning. Who speaks through the archive, who frames it, and whose voice is still missing. Digital environments tend to amplify these tensions through scale, speed, and the false promise of neutral access. My next slide would be about dissonant heritage. Tembridge and Ashworth argued that all heritage is dissonant. Every heritage site or collection carries conflicting meanings, different memories, sometimes irreconcilable interpretations. When we work with sensitive or contested archives, we're not encountering a special problem. We're actually confronting this condition in its most acute and unavoidable form. And this matters for how we frame the challenge. The question is how to create forms of mediation that allow it to be experienced, thought through, and productively held. Also, emotional engagement has moved to the center of how visitors encounter the past. And we know that this strongly supports learning and memory. But when emotional intensity becomes the dominant register, it can actually narrow a visitor's attention and reduce their capacity for contextual understanding. This can be called the empathy paradox. The experience becomes overwhelming in a way that prevents you from seeing the bigger picture. This is a delicate balance, and one that becomes particularly pressing as we design immersive digital and XR environments, where emotional intensity can be heightened in ways that are qualitatively different from a conventional exhibition. So we see this tension most clearly in the growing use of first-person interpretation, avatars, testimonial voices, character-based narratives. These formats create a sense of immediacy, a proximity that can be powerful. But visitors are carrying their own awareness of contemporary conflicts and ongoing violence. And recent research suggests a significant shift in how these experiences are being perceived. In Holocaust museums, for example, the dominant response is moving away from never again towards something closer to yet again, a sense that the past is not concluded, but recurring, and almost inevitably. This is a serious challenge. How can emotionally strong experiences support understanding and a sense of agency, as Maria also mentioned, rather than reinforcing indifference, paralysis, or despair? This brings me to the ethical problems coming with first-person formats. Avatars, voices from the past, raise a set of ethical problems. The first is consent. Historical figures cannot consent to being voiced, reanimated, or performed. And this problem is amplified when the raw material is archival traces that were never intended as performance. The second is what I would call ventriloquism. Every avatar embeds choices about tone, affect, position, what the figure says, and how they say it. Those choices are made by curators, designers, or algorithms. Here, the risk is not that the historical figure stays silent, it is that we speak for them. The third is particularly urgent in post-colonial contexts and connects directly to the next speaker, Annelise, and also to Maria's example. When avatars are used to give voice to the enslaved, the colonized, the violated, there is a real danger of making the violated perform their own suffering for the emotional benefit of an audience. And finally, the more convincing the avatar, the greater the risk the visitors mistake interpretation for testimony. First-person formats are indeed powerful, so we need to approach them critically and responsibly. And this is the key here, responsible interpretation. Making historical material visible and accessible does not automatically lead to understanding. What becomes crucial is how the encounter is structured, how visitors are guided or not guided through complexity. This is where historical thinking becomes especially relevant. It involves working with perspectives, questioning sources, recognizing the role of interpretation, recognizing the ethical dimensions of historical processes and the responsibilities that carry with them, and holding together multiple, sometimes conflicting narratives. So visitors become interpreters. This shift matters enormously when the material is highly dissonant, sensitive, or contested. Under this light, the goal of designing digital heritage experiences is not clarity or resolution, but a productive engagement with complexity. The problem with highly dissonant archives is that they open up questions which don't resolve. They require spaces where different perspectives can coexist, and where visitors are genuinely invited to take part in the interpretive act. Digital tools can support this, but only under certain conditions. Interaction alone does not create dialogue. What matters is how the encounter is framed, facilitated, and sustained over time. So, what seems more valuable is learning how to work with discomfort, how to create conditions in which it can be processed rather than avoided or overwhelming. Here, there is a distinction that I find very useful, the difference between a safe space and a brave space. A safe space tends to minimize discomfort. A brave space accepts that discomfort will be present and focuses on how it is held, so it brings in care, structure, and the possibility of real dialogue. And it is precisely here, at the question of how institutions actually hold these tensions in practice, that I want to hand over to Annelie van Richen from the House of European History, who has been doing exactly this kind of work, thinking through how a European institution engages with contested and post-colonial narratives, how it creates spaces where missing voices are genuinely heard. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you, Annelie. Thank you.
Bonjour à tout le monde, je m'appelle Annelise Ismaël, je travaille à la Maison de l'Histoire européenne ici à Bruxelles. Je parle français mais je vais continuer en anglais parce que les autres l'ont fait aussi et peut-être c'est... Voilà. Est-ce qu'il y a mes slides ouais, super, génial. Donc du coup, so my name is Annelies, and I work as an outreach coordinator and project manager at the House of European History. The House of European History is a museum located here in Brussels. It's a museum on history of the European continent, starting roughly from the 19th century. And we also have a specific focus on the history of the European integration. That explains itself because we're also an initiative from the European Parliament, and therefore we're also very young, we opened in 2017. Just gonna put on a timer to make sure that I stay within my speaking. So I'm here to talk about projects that address controversial and sensitive archives. Obviously, our museum also deals with colonial history and memory of colonial history. So I have 4 projects that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about. So the first project, and we can go, is an exhibition that will open on the 17th of April. It's the title of the exhibition is Post-Colonial ? And it's an exhibition that invites visitors to reflect on colonial history and how colonial history still shapes our societies today. The exhibition looks at the structural foundations of European colonialism. It looks at how Europeans have preserved their power also when their colonial empires disintegrated, how this affected newly independent countries during the period of decolonization and how it still affects these countries, and what the effect is of this colonial history on our societies in Europe still today. The exhibition presents obviously historical objects, contemporary artworks as well, and personal stories. So it's also, it has been created with a kind of advisory committee of decolonial, anti-colonial activists, researchers. So the curators have worked with different advisors, and there will also be a public program that has been co-created with anti-colonial activists, experts, practitioners throughout the year. Another example of how our museum deals with colonial memory and more sensitive histories is a educational tool that we've developed and that will be launched soon. It's called What is Racism? From Colonial Histories to Contemporary Inequalities. It's part of a bigger educational project that's called Historical. So these are educational tools that are available for teachers across Europe, and it's translated in 24 languages. It's the result of a needs assessment of over 1,000 teachers across Europe, and one of the needs of teachers in Europe is to talk to have tools to address colonial history and racism in their classrooms, because these are currently missing in the curriculums in European schools. This toolbox addresses racism not as an interpersonal process, but looks at the systemic nature of racism and connects it to colonial history. And it does so in a historically grounded and pedagogically sensitive approach. So it looks at how racism is connected to colonial expansion. So it traces it back to history, basically. The objectives are to identify the historical roots of racism in colonialism. It looks at key events and figures. It looks at different forms of colonialism and racism. It engages also with the history of resistance, and it thinks critically about the social structures that produce and sustain inequalities. And it also promotes students to think about their own role in society and the importance of anti-racism. The toolbox is the toolbox is for students from 15 to 18 years old all across Europe. It's an educational tool that is free to use to everyone. And it's for teachers in history, civic education, geography, and languages. And it consists of different aspects. So students go through a timeline of colonial history through different persons, different decolonial voices. And they engage also with certain objects in our museum. They also engage with a video with Gloria Wecker. It gives you a bit of an idea what the toolbox looks like. So this is the second project. Third project that I wanted to share with you that we have launched in our museum is Echoes. Echoes is a participatory project in our museum for young adults from Brussels. It's a project that engages with a group of 15 young adults from different neighborhoods, different origins, different socioeconomic backgrounds in our museum for over a year. So they are found through a call for application. And we look together at the missing narratives in our museum. So they are presented with our narrative on European history, and they get to say, through a workshop with different inspiring professionals, what is missing in our museum, what do we not tell about European history, who is missing. And then they go search for these voices in Brussels through audio visual projects. So that's a bit the idea. It allows us to work with a group of young people from Brussels. It allows us to shift the power from the curators to this group. They are paid, so it's a meaningful long-term participation. They are really they develop competences because this is an age group. They are between 19 and 26. It's the age group that they enter into the labor market. So they are encouraged to develop critical thinking about history and museums, especially about how historical narratives are constructed, whose stories are centered, how institutions like museums shape collective memory, and how the museum currently represents or fails to represent different communities and perspectives. They are encouraged to seeing historical events from different viewpoints, and they participate in a collective curating process. And we're looking at new methodologies to allow also for dissensus within the group. It's a really exciting project. Their installation is then presented in the museum for over 4 months. And then there is a last project, and it's the last slide. It's a new participatory project called History Lab Europe. Geraldine is also engaged in this project. We invited different partners to work with us to critically reflect on our museum practices, such as collecting, different practices in our museum. And this will launch next year in May. But I will stop here. Thanks.